A man of peace is not a pacifist. A man of peace is simply a pool of silence. He pulsates a new kind of energy into the world. He sings a new song. He lives in a totally new way. His very way of life is that of grace, that of prayer, that of compassion. Whomsoever he touches, he creates more love energy. The man of peace is creative. He is not against war, because to be against anything is to be at war. He is not against war. He simply understands why war exists. And out of that understanding, he becomes peaceful. Only when there are many people who are pools of peace, who are pools of silence, of understanding, will the war disappear. And one other thing I want to read for you, which ties in with that, is an excerpt from Pema Chodron's book and what she's been teaching for the last couple of years, which is a program called Practicing Peace in Times of War. War begins when we harden our hearts, and we harden them easily, in minor ways, and then in quite serious, major ways, such as hatred and prejudice. Whenever we feel uncomfortable, we harden our hearts. It's so sad, really, because our motivation in hardening our hearts is to find some kind of ease, some kind of freedom from the distress that we're feeling. Someone once gave me a poem with a line in it that offers a good definition of peace. That definition is softening what is rigid in our hearts. We can talk about ending war. We can march for ending war. We can do everything in our power. But war is never going to end as long as our hearts and minds are hardened against each other. As a Buddhist practitioner, which people always ask me, what do you do? We don't do very much. We sit down a lot. But our lifetime assignment is to soften our hearts and minds. And Buddhism offers us many methods to do this. One of the most common, which many of you know of and have practiced, is practiced in most all traditions of Buddhism. It's called the Four Immeasurables, the Four Limitless Ones, also called the Four Brahma Viharas. Brahma means the realm of gods, and Vihara means the abode of gods. We say this several times a day, at least once, when we begin the day in the morning. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the cause of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the great happiness devoid of suffering. And may all sentient beings dwell in great equanimity, free from passion, aggression, and prejudice. So we are trying to develop with those four things complete love, complete compassion, complete joy, and complete equanimity. Thank you.
Zechariah sang God's praises in a hymn we find in Luke's Gospel, Luke 1, 68 to 79, known as the Benedictus. It is absolutely filled with prophecies, and in its last 3 verses are found words which relate directly to us as would-be peacemakers. Zechariah says to the baby John, "And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people by the forgiveness of their sins. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Now let's unpack that. I see 4 elements. First, there's going to be a divine visitation. Expressed poetically, the dawn from on high will break upon us. Second, John's task is to prepare people for it, to make them ready for the Lord. Third, John will tell everyone that there would be a major forgiveness of sins, a time of salvation for all God's people. Finally, the mission on which John is sent will have 2 aspects. First, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. The second, to guide the people's feet into the way of peace. Now, if you're familiar with the book of Isaiah, you'll recognize that John will be engaged in fulfilling several of Isaiah's prophecies. So let me cite just 2. Isaiah 9, verse 1, the people who walked in darkness will see a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. And Isaiah 60, verse 1, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. And we can interpret this in at least 2 ways. First, in order that people might be guided into the way of peace, the darkness in which they are living must be dispersed. Or, as people are guided into the way of peace, the darkness under which the world lives will be dispersed. Who is it who lives in deep darkness today? Is it not those who live amid the dreadful violence of war? The people of Iraq? The people of Congo who, for 20 years now, have lived with repeated violent wars, suffering the deaths of 4 million people? The people of Darfur, of Gaza, of Kenya? The list goes on. But there is another group who live in deep darkness. Those of us who live with few visible signs of violence, consuming, spending, enjoying life, while from our lands dreadful, immeasurable violence goes out, destroying, robbing God's people of their God-given rights. As Dwight Eisenhower put it, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone, it is spending the sweat of laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from an iron cross. Our group needs to hear a prophetic word so we and our fellow citizens become aware of the violence we cause around the world, to disperse the darkness in which we live, and guide our feet into the unaccustomed ways of peace. And the groups that live in constant dread and fear need to hear, above the din and chaos of violence, this promise: a day of peace will indeed come. Karl Daw puts the task of John, the peacemaker's task, in this way in his hymn based on the Benedictus. My child, as prophet of the Lord, you will prepare the way to tell God's people they are saved from sin's eternal sway. Then shall God's mercy from on high shine forth and never cease to drive away the gloom of death and lead us into peace.